You think you're in control. You think your choices are your own, that your desires rise from some natural place within you, pure and untouched. But what if I told you that your most primal instincts, especially those tied to sex, are not only predictable but actively being used to control you? This isn't a conspiracy. This is psychology. Carl Jung once warned that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That quote isn't poetic. It's a warning. Because right now, the parts of you that you ignore, the ones that feel the most intense and personal, are actually the easiest to manipulate. Look around. Sex is everywhere. Advertisements, music, videos, social media influencers posing just barely within the lines of acceptability. But it's not just there for shock value or attention. It's a trigger, a carefully engineered mechanism that reaches into your unconscious, bypassing logic, and hijacking your instincts. Most people scroll, stare, double tap, and move on, never realizing that every flicker of arousal is a string being pulled. And the worst part? You don't even feel it happening. You think you're just being entertained. But you're being trained. Jung believed that the unconscious wasn't just a shadowy realm of forgotten memories. He saw it as a vast, potent force shaping your thoughts, emotions, behaviors, everything. And sex, being one of the deepest human drives, sits right at the center of that force. It's not just biology. It's mythology, archetype, story. It's the hero and the temptress, the fall and the forbidden. It's your deepest hunger and your deepest fear. And when you don't understand how it works inside of you, it becomes the perfect tool for others to use against you. Why do you stop scrolling when you see a certain image? Why do you feel a sudden sense of inadequacy when watching someone flaunt their body, their relationship, their power? Why do you crave validation through attraction? These aren't random reactions, they're echoes, responses wired into you through years of unconscious programming. And they come with a cost. Every time you give in without questioning, you weaken the part of you that's supposed to be in control, the conscious self, the real you. But here's the terrifying part. Most people never notice. They live their entire lives believing they are their desires, that what they want is who they are, that arousal equals truth. They don't ask where those desires came from. They don't see how sex is used as a lens, distorting reality, defining value, and deciding what matters. They just follow the pull, and by the time they realize how far they've been led, they've already given up too much. This isn't about demonizing sex. It's about understanding the way it's used, the way it's weaponized, the way your unconscious mind can be turned against you if you don't confront it. And the only way to do that is by going deep, far beneath the surface of what you think you know, into the myths, the archetypes, the emotional traps that Carl Jung spent his life trying to map. So let's go there. Not to judge your desires, but to question them. Not to kill instinct, but to understand how easily it can be twisted. Because if you don't look at what's driving you, someone else already is. You didn't choose the way your desire looks. You inherited it. Before you ever had your first sexual thought, before your body even knew what arousal was, the world had already started shaping it. Your parents, your culture, your religion, your screen time, the faces and bodies you were told were beautiful, the way affection was rewarded or withheld, all of it laid the foundation for what you would one day crave. But none of that felt like programming. It felt natural. That's how the unconscious works. It convinces you that what it feeds you is truth. Carl Jung spoke of the unconscious as a hidden architect, designing your reality behind the curtain of awareness. And sex? It's one of his favorite materials. From the earliest stages of life, sexuality isn't just a physical instinct. It's a symbol. It's the vehicle through which we explore shame, identity, power, and love. But because we don't understand this symbolic layer, we assume it's just a feeling, a reaction. We don't realize it's a language, one that's constantly speaking even when we aren't listening. Think of how desire manifests. It's not just attraction, it's obsession, comparison, envy, fantasy, projection. You're not simply seeing someone you're attracted to. You're projecting your own longings, your insecurities, your unmet emotional needs onto them. The woman on the screen isn't just a woman. She's a myth. She's your mother, your forbidden fruit, your salvation, your downfall. She represents everything you're afraid to admit you want and everything you're ashamed to need. And you think it's about her, but it never is. We live in a hypersexualized environment that teaches you to consume beauty but never understand it, to chase validation but never question its origin. You're told to sculpt your body, master your image, seduce with confidence, because that's what makes you powerful. But underneath this surface-level empowerment is an ancient story, one far older than social media or modern porn culture. It's the story of the anima and the animus, Jung's concepts for the unconscious feminine and masculine within all of us. The anima, in Jung's framework, is the feminine figure that appears in a man's dreams, fantasies, and projections. She represents emotion, intuition, vulnerability, but also seduction, chaos, and temptation. The animus, for women, is the masculine force, logic, authority, action, control. But these are not just ideas. They are archetypal energies that pull at us from within, often unacknowledged but always active. When you see someone and feel that magnetic pull, that ache in your chest or tension in your stomach, it's often these inner archetypes being activated, trying to reconcile something deep inside of you. This is where things get dangerous. Because you don't fall in love with people. You fall in love with the unresolved parts of yourself that they seem to complete. You chase what mirrors your inner world, hoping it will fix something you never consciously noticed was broken. And sex, in this context, becomes both the medicine and the poison, the cure and the curse. It promises wholeness, but often delivers fragmentation. Now ask yourself, how much of your desire is really yours? How much of it was implanted through repetition, trauma, fantasy, or pain? Have you ever paused to ask why certain body types excite you more than others? Why certain acts, voices, attitudes feel more real to you than others? We assume we're choosing, but we're mostly reacting. And those reactions are deeply conditioned by forces we've never met, but feel every day. And here's the uncomfortable truth Jung hinted at. If you don't make those forces conscious, they become fate. You keep chasing the same relationships, falling for the same traps, idealizing the same illusions, not because you're cursed, but because you're on autopilot. The sexual patterns you think are just preference may actually be a loop, one you didn't create, but one you keep fueling, because it feels familiar. It feels like home, even when it hurts. Society banks on this. Marketing campaigns aren't selling products, they're selling archetypes. They know you'll buy if they can seduce your unconscious. That's why perfume ads are dripping in mystery and soft lighting. Why luxury cars are paired with sultry gazes. Why fitness influencers post more skin than content. It's not just about desire, it's about identification. They want you to see their brand and see a part of yourself, or rather a part of yourself you wish existed. And to get that feeling, you'll give them money, time, loyalty, without ever questioning why. This is the architecture Jung was warning us about. Not just the shape of your desires, but the walls of the maze you're trapped in. You walk through life thinking you're guided by passion, by freedom, by instinct. But you're really following paths laid out long before you arrived. And the most seductive ones, the ones tied to sex, attraction, validation, are usually the ones that lead the furthest from your center. But you don't know that yet, because you're still inside the system. You're still watching through the lens of longing, still interpreting the world through unexamined fantasies. You think sex is just sex, that attraction is just chemistry, that what turns you on is natural, not cultural. But you're starting to wonder, aren't you? You're starting to feel the cracks. Sex is rarely just about sex, it's about identity, power, longing, wounds. It's a mirror, and most people don't know what they're seeing when they look into it. Jung believed that projection is the unconscious mind's way of showing us ourselves, by disguising our inner truths as external obsessions. When you're drawn to someone in a way that feels intense, irrational, magnetic, you're not just attracted, you're projecting. You're seeing a part of yourself you don't recognize or can't accept, and wrapping it around someone else's face. You think you want them. What you really want is wholeness. Desire becomes a code, a message from your unconscious, begging to be read. But no one teaches you to read it. You're taught to follow it, to gratify it, to use it as a compass for authenticity. Follow your heart. Do what feels right. But what if what feels right is actually a symptom, a signal of some deeper fragmentation, a reflection of the parts of you that were silenced, shamed, or denied? Jung called this the shadow, the aspects of the self that we push away because they're too painful or unacceptable. But the shadow doesn't stay buried. It leaks out. Especially through sex. Think of the last person you couldn't stop thinking about, the one who consumed your mind. What did they represent? Not just physically. Go deeper. Did they feel powerful, safe, dangerous? Did they give you a sense of being seen, validated, dominated, protected, devoured? Those feelings aren't about them. They're about you, about unmet needs, unresolved traumas, repressed desires. And the sexual charge? That's the lightning bolt that happens when a piece of your shadow finds a match in someone else's presence. This is where projection becomes manipulation, not always by others, but by your own mind. You create stories. She's the one. He completes me. I can't live without them. You wrap mythological meaning around a human being, and in doing so you hand over your power. You expect them to carry your missing pieces. And when they fail, because they always do, you call it heartbreak. But it's not heartbreak, it's disillusionment. It's the painful realization that you weren't in love with them. You were in love with what they represented. In the modern world, this dynamic has become a breeding ground for self-deception. You're bombarded with curated images of intimacy, slow motion, kisses, sculpted bodies, hands gripping thighs, whispered promises of belonging. You begin to confuse the image of connection with connection itself. You seek intensity instead of intimacy. You chase sparks instead of stability, and slowly, without realizing it, you begin to equate validation with love, attention with worth, arousal with meaning. The algorithms know this. They feed it. They exploit the fact that your sexual instincts are tied to unresolved emotional needs. Every swipe, every suggested video, every perfectly timed ad is a calculated attempt to press the right buttons in your unconscious. They don't care who you are. They care what keeps you staring. They know that your loneliness, your sexual frustration, your unspoken shame, all of it is fuel. You're not just a user. You're a puppet being taught to mistake desire for direction. And yet we keep participating. Because the system feels good, it feels like home even if it hurts. This is the paradox. Your sexual instincts evolved for survival, for reproduction, for bonding. But in a hyper-stimulated world, they've been hijacked, repurposed, turned into compulsions that you mistake for passion. Your hunger is real, but what you're feeding it isn't. You're drinking salt water and wondering why you're still thirsty. Carl Jung understood that healing doesn't come from indulging every desire. It comes from understanding where desire comes from facing the parts of yourself that you've buried, the wounded child, the shamed lover, the rejected self. Until you confront these inner characters, you will keep projecting them onto others. You'll keep seeing your pain in their eyes, your worth in their attraction, your story in their smile. And they'll never be able to hold all of that, because they weren't meant to. In relationships, this creates a cycle. You fall in love with a projection, become addicted to the high, avoid the discomfort of true vulnerability, and then blame the other person when the illusion fades. But real connection doesn't happen in projection. It happens in the uncomfortable space where you begin to see someone clearly, flaws and all, and let yourself be seen too, not as a fantasy, but as a fractured, healing human being. And this clarity only comes when you stop letting sex dictate your sense of self. That doesn't mean rejecting desire. It means questioning it. When you feel drawn to someone, ask yourself why. When you feel inadequate because of someone else's beauty, Ask what story you're believing. When you crave validation through sexual attention, ask what you're really trying to fill. These questions don't have easy answers. They're not meant to. But asking them breaks the trance. And in a world built to keep you asleep, awareness is rebellion. So much of your suffering comes from mistaking projection for truth. Mistaking sexual energy for love. Mistaking validation for self-worth. But it doesn't have to stay that way. You can learn to see beyond the image, beyond the myth, beyond the fantasy. You can learn to hold your desire without letting it hold you hostage. But first, you have to admit something most people never will. You don't know why you want what you want. And that's where the real work begins. There's a lie we tell ourselves, that we are free. Free to desire what we want. Free to live how we choose. Free to indulge or abstain, to pursue or reject, to shape our sexual expression on our own terms. But freedom, as Jung understood it, is not the absence of restriction. It's the presence of self-awareness. And most people are not aware. They're trapped, not by external chains, but by the silent contracts they've made with shame, repression, and illusion. Sex, when repressed, doesn't disappear, it festers. It moves underground into the shadow where it mutates into something more dangerous. Obsession, addiction, aggression, numbness, control. It begins to leak into areas it doesn't belong, influencing choices you can't trace, guiding behaviors you don't understand. Jung saw this clearly, that whatever you push out of the light of consciousness doesn't die, it becomes stronger. And the more you try to silence it, the louder it speaks through disguise. Look at society. We claim to be liberated. Sex is everywhere. But is it free? Or has it simply been commodified, turned into currency, language, status? We use sex to sell everything, from burgers to watches to political campaigns. But the real cost is rarely mentioned. The cost of not knowing what lies beneath the urge. The cost of burying trauma beneath performance. The cost of confusing liberation with overexposure. Many people grow up in environments where sex is treated as taboo, where desire is met with silence or worse, punishment, where bodies are not celebrated but policed, where curiosity is shamed and pleasure becomes a secret you carry like a sin. In these conditions, repression becomes survival. You learn to disconnect from your instincts, to live in your head, to analyze, spiritualize, intellectualize everything, because the body is dangerous, the body is chaos, the body is wrong. But you don't escape the body. You just exile it. You turn down its volume until it becomes background noise, and then you pretend it's not there, but it is. And when it's not acknowledged, it rebels. Quietly at first, then violently. It shows up in compulsive behaviors, in secret obsessions, in dreams soaked in longing or dread. It shows up in rigid beliefs, in purity complexes, in the need to control others, especially those who seem too free. You judge what you're afraid to feel. You condemn what you secretly crave. This is the great irony of repression. It creates the very monsters it tries to kill. Jung observed that the more moralistic a person is on the surface, the more likely their shadow is swollen beneath. The preacher with a hidden addiction. The public figure with a double life. The activist driven more by unprocessed rage than genuine compassion. These are not anomalies, they are consequences. Repression doesn't make you virtuous, it makes you divided. And a divided person cannot be whole, cannot be free. And so, we build identities around our fragmentation. We call it discipline, purity, strength. But it's not strength to run from what you don't understand. It's not purity to amputate parts of yourself. Real strength is integration, the ability to face the darkness within you without becoming consumed by it. And that includes your sexuality, especially your sexuality. Most people, when they feel sexual desire, experience a surge of energy, but they don't know how to hold it. It's too much, too raw, too intense. So they try to discharge it immediately, through fantasy, through porn, through meaningless encounters, through self-denial. But the energy isn't the enemy. It's the signal. It's life force. It's telling you something is awake in you, something primal and powerful. The question is, can you stay with it long enough to hear what it's saying? We've confused expression with liberation. Just because you can speak doesn't mean you're being honest. Just because you can post your body doesn't mean you've healed your shame. Just because you have access to pleasure doesn't mean you know how to hold it. This is the illusion. That sexuality, once freed from rules, becomes whole. But freedom, without depth, is just another mask, another performance, another layer of unconscious control. Because until you confront the root, until you ask why your desire takes the shape it does, you're still reacting, still running, still blind. Repression and indulgence are two sides of the same wound. One hides, the other consumes. But neither integrates. Jung's work challenges us to stop choosing between extremes and start seeing what lies beneath them. He invites us into the terrifying space between suppression and surrender. A space where we have to sit with discomfort, with longing, with the unmet needs we've tried to forget. And in that space, something rare happens. We begin to see. We begin to recognize how much of our identity has been shaped not by truth but by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of losing control. And when you start peeling back those layers, you may realize that your sexuality, the most personal, intimate part of you, has never really been yours. It's been a script, one you inherited, one you performed, one you believed in so deeply you forgot to question it. But now, the questions are rising, and the answers won't come from books or gurus or influencers. They'll come from the quiet moments, the raw ones, the ones where you admit to yourself that you don't know who you are without your wounds, the ones where you stop performing and start listening, not to the world, but to the voice you buried long ago, the one that whispered, "Something isn't right." That voice is still there, and it's getting louder. There's a truth no one wants to admit. Sex is power, not just over others, but over the self. The way you experience desire reveals how you relate to control, vulnerability, dominance, submission. These aren't just kinks or preferences. They're psychological blueprints, deep emotional patterns dressed in erotic form. Jung saw sexual energy not merely as libido, but as a raw expression of psychic force. When that force isn't understood, it mutates. When it's misunderstood, it becomes a weapon, against yourself or others. Power is intoxicating. That feeling when someone looks at you with hunger. When your presence shifts the energy in the room. When your body becomes a symbol, a lure, a spell, you feel seen, desired, alive. For a moment, you're not invisible, not small. But this rush, the high of being wanted, is deceptive. Because if your sense of worth depends on being wanted, then your power isn't real. It's borrowed, and what's borrowed can always be taken away. So many people chase this illusion of sexual power. They sculpt their bodies to fit the ideal. They practice seduction like a ritual. They collect hearts, likes, orgasms, not for joy, but for proof. Proof that they matter, that they are enough. But underneath all the surface confidence lies a deeper hunger, one that no amount of attention can satisfy, because it's not really about sex, it's about the ego trying to survive. The ego is fragile. It's always afraid. Afraid of being forgotten. Afraid of being unloved. Afraid of being exposed. And sex, when used unconsciously, becomes its favorite disguise. A way to feel important. A way to dominate instead of dissolve. But Jung warned that true power doesn't come from control. It comes from integration. The ego's job is not to rule, but to serve the self. And the self only emerges when we stop running from what we are. When you use sex to validate the ego, you create a cycle that can never fulfill you. You're always chasing the next hit of attraction, the next conquest, the next person to reflect back the image you've carefully constructed. But this is not love. It's performance. And every performance distances you further from authenticity. The mask becomes the face. and eventually you forget who's behind it. Now imagine what happens when you stop chasing, when you stop needing to be desired to feel real, when you stop using your sexuality to cover the wounds of your childhood, your shame, your fear of being ordinary. That's where the collapse begins. The ego trembles. The identity you built on seduction starts to fall apart. And what's left? Something quieter, something harder to define, something honest. This honesty is terrifying because it means surrendering the illusion of control. It means letting yourself be seen, not as an object of desire, but as a whole human being, flawed, afraid, tender. It means facing the parts of you that sex helped you avoid, the grief, the guilt, the longing that never found a name. But this is where transformation happens. Not in the peak of orgasm or the ecstasy of conquest, but in the stillness that follows. In the silence where you finally hear yourself. Jung taught that wholeness is not perfection. It's union, the bringing together of light and shadow, masculine and feminine, instinct and awareness. And in sexuality, this union is not just physical, it's symbolic. It's the dance between death and life, fear and love, self and other. To engage with this level of depth requires courage, the kind of courage that asks not, who do I attract, but who am I when no one is watching? Until you ask that question, you're not free. If you've made it this far, it means something in you is awake. Maybe it's just beginning to stir. Maybe it's been whispering for years. But you know now, this isn't just about sex. This is about truth. About waking up from the stories you've inherited and finally seeing what's been driving you all along. Carl Jung didn't offer quick answers. He offered maps, guides into the unconscious, into the depths where transformation actually begins. If you're ready to go further, to stop living on autopilot, to face the uncomfortable questions most people run from, then this journey is just beginning. And if this video spoke to something inside you, don't let it be another thing you forget. Like this video if it made you pause. Comment below. What part hit you the hardest? Subscribe to the channel if you're ready to go deeper into the mind, the soul, and the hidden forces shaping our lives. Because we're just scratching the surface, and the unconscious is still watching.